The silk curtains trembled in the lamplight as trembling fingers pressed against the cold marble wall. Beyond the carved cedar doors, the Emperor's voice echoed through the gilded corridors of the Forbidden City, summoning another name from his endless scroll. The young woman's breath came in shallow gasps, her embroidered slippers silent against the polished floor as she approached the chamber that would seal her fate. The eunuch's pale hand gestured toward the threshold, his eyes reflecting neither pity nor judgment, only the cold efficiency of a system that had devoured countless lives before hers. Inside, the scent of sandalwood mingled with something darker, more primal. The Emperor sat motionless upon his throne of ivory and gold, his gaze fixed not upon her face, but upon the ceremonial jade bracelet that marked her as his property. She had been chosen 3 moons ago from among 1,000 candidates, her beauty catalogued and measured like precious jade. Her family had wept with joy at the honour, an honour that now felt like a death sentence as she crossed the threshold into a world where women became ghosts, their identities dissolved into the singular purpose of imperial pleasure. The heavy doors closed behind her with the finality of a tomb sealing. In the distance, other voices whispered prayers in languages the palace walls had swallowed decades ago. Tonight, she would learn what her grandmother had whispered in terrified fragments, that some honours were curses, and some golden cages held horrors that daylight never touched. The Emperor's lips curved into what might have been a smile, but his eyes held the emptiness of a man who had forgotten that the trembling figure before him had once possessed a name, dreams, and a life beyond these walls. The morning ritual began before dawn broke over the vermilion walls of the Forbidden City. In the Hall of Supreme Harmony, steam rose from porcelain bowls as court officials prepared the day's selections. The Emperor's appetite was not for food alone, it was for the careful choreography of power that reduced human lives to entries in leather-bound ledgers. The system had evolved over in laughter or song, were trained to whisper responses that pleased masculine ears. The education was comprehensive and ruthless. Morning lessons covered the 64 arts of the inner palace, everything from the precise angle at which to hold a teacup to the particular way silk should rustle when they walked. They practiced calligraphy until their fingers bled, copying poems that praised imperial virtue, while their own thoughts remained unspoken. The afternoon brought instruction in more intimate arts, delivered by eunuchs whose own mutilation served as a constant reminder of the palace's capacity for transforming human bodies into instruments of service. Each woman received a new name upon entering the palace grounds. Their birth names were recorded in archives that few would ever consult again, replaced by designations that reflected their function rather than their identity. Spring fragrance, jade harmony, autumn moon. These appellations, beautiful as flower petals, masked the systematic erasure of individual will that occurred within these walls. The ranking system divided them into 9 distinct levels, from the lowest serving girls to the exalted imperial noble consorts. Advancement depended not only on beauty but on fertility, political connections, and the mysterious alchemy of imperial preference. Those who caught the Emperor's eye might find themselves elevated overnight, from obscure concubine to powerful consort, wielding influence over court appointments and family fortunes. Those who failed to conceive, who aged beyond desirability, or who simply fell from favour faced a different fate. Gradual invisibility followed by assignment to menial palace duties until death released them from their golden prison. The daily routine rarely varied. Dawn brought prayers to the ancestors and offerings to the goddess of fertility. Breakfast consisted of bird's nest soup and delicate pastries, consumed in silence while matrons observed their posture and eating habits. The morning hours were devoted to personal grooming, an elaborate process involving multiple baths, the application of lead-based cosmetics that slowly poisoned their systems, and the arrangement of elaborate hairstyles that required several servants and took hours to ritualized chants. Names were written on ivory tablets and drawn from a golden urn, or sometimes he would simply point to a woman who had caught his attention during a ceremonial gathering. The chosen one would be bathed in rare oils, dressed in robes that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime, and carried to the imperial bedchamber wrapped in a yellow silk carpet, a tradition designed to prevent her from memorizing the route and ensure that she remained helplessly dependent on palace staff for navigation. The symbolism was deliberate and crushing. She arrived not walking under her own power, but as precious cargo delivered for consumption. Those who bore sons gained protection and status, their positions secured by the potential heir growing within their wombs. Those who bore daughters faced uncertain futures, their value diminished by their failure to produce male heirs. Most tragic were those who remained barren. They continued to serve the emperor's pleasure while watching younger women arrive to take their places in his affections. The palace walls that surrounded this world rose 40 feet high, topped with glazed tiles that reflected the sky like scales on a dragon's back. Guard towers punctuated the perimeter at regular intervals, manned by eunuchs whose loyalty had been purchased with their manhood. No woman entered these walls voluntarily, and none ever left them alive. Behind the ceremonial splendor lay practices that transformed the palace into a theater of systematic cruelty. The emperor's appetite extended beyond mere physical possession. It encompassed rituals that had evolved over centuries into elaborate methods of psychological domination. The selection ceremony occurred monthly during the full moon, when the emperor's virility was believed to be at its peak. The chosen women were stripped of their silk robes and examined by palace physicians like livestock at market. Their bodies were measured, their teeth inspected, their private areas probed for signs of disease or previous contact with men. Those who failed these examinations disappeared into the lower levels of the palace, where they served as cleaning slaves until disease or despair claimed them. The survivors faced the ritual of purification, a three-day terror of virgin girls, orchestrating elaborate scenarios designed to maximize their fear before claiming them. Some were told they were being prepared for execution, only to be spared at the last moment in exchange for absolute submission. Others were forced to witness the emperor's violence toward previous favourites before their own encounters, ensuring their compliance through terror. The palace maintained a chamber of correction beneath the main quarters, accessible through a hidden stairway behind the dragon throne. Here, women who displayed insufficient enthusiasm or failed to conceive were subjected to punishments that court records euphemistically termed remedial instruction. The chamber contained devices imported from various provinces, bamboo cages barely large enough for a crouching human form where disobedient concubines spent days in darkness, wooden stocks that forced unnatural positions while cold water dripped steadily onto the victim's forehead, and silk cords that left no marks but caused exquisite pain when applied by experts in their use. The emperor's physician, Dr. Wang Shu, maintained detailed records of experiments conducted on palace women. Under the guise of improving imperial health, he tested various aphrodisiacs and fertility treatments on unwilling subjects. His notes, written in coded language, described procedures that would horrify modern readers. The forced implantation of animal organs to increase sexual appetite, the systematic poisoning of women with mercury compounds to observe the effects on their behavior, and surgical alterations designed to enhance the emperor's pleasure while causing permanent damage to the victims. Most horrifying was the practice known as the flowering, a ritual reserved for the emperor's birthday celebration. 12 virgin girls, selected for their youth and beauty, were prepared through weeks of special feeding designed to enhance their physical attributes. On the appointed night, they were arranged in the imperial garden like living flowers, each positioned according to the zodiac and dressed in colours corresponding to their birth months. The emperor would move among them, selecting one for immediate gratification, while the others remained motionless, forbidden to move or speak until dismissed at dawn. And additional privileges, while those who disappointed faced assignment to more demanding or dangerous situations. The rating system created a hierarchy of suffering, where even the emperor's favourites understood that their elevated status depended on the continued degradation of those beneath them. Letters discovered in the palace archives revealed the existence of a secret network among the palace women, a desperate attempt to maintain human connection in an environment designed to isolate and dehumanize them. These letters, written in coded symbols resembling embroidery patterns, spoke of shared grief, quiet acts of resistance, and plans for escape that never materialized. The discovery of this correspondence led to brutal reprisals, with suspected participants subjected to punishments that served as warnings to others who might consider similar acts of solidarity. The most damning evidence emerged from the emperor's private correspondence with provincial governors. in which he explicitly requested women who exhibited specific vulnerabilities, recent orphans, daughters of executed criminals, girls from families in debt to the imperial treasury. These selections were not random acts of lust, but calculated choices designed to ensure the victims would have no protectors, no family members who might question their treatment or attempt rescue. The first cracks in the imperial system appeared not in the grand halls of power, but in the whispered conversations of palace servants who could no longer ignore what they witnessed daily. The eunuch Li Wei, whose diary would later expose the palace's darkest secrets, began documenting events with increasing urgency as he watched the emperor's appetites spiral beyond all restraint. The breaking point arrived during the festival of the autumn moon, when the emperor's latest obsession, a girl of barely 16 named Chen Mei Li, was found dead in her chambers 3 days after being selected for imperial favour. The official cause, recorded in palace documents, cited sudden illness brought on by excessive joy at imperial attention. The reality, witnessed by servants who prepared her body, told a different story entirely. Her corpse bore marks that no amount of cosmetic artistry could conceal. Women were forced to file past her corpse, each required to touch her cold flesh while reciting pledges of absolute obedience to imperial will. Within weeks, 3 more women died under similar circumstances. The palace physicians, bound by oaths of secrecy, continued to fabricate causes of death while privately documenting the escalating violence. Dr. Wang Shu's notes from this period abandoned all medical pretense, describing the emperor as consumed by appetites that no human form can satisfy without destruction. The psychological impact on the surviving women manifested in ways that horrified even the hardened palace staff. Some retreated into catatonic silence, refusing food and requiring forced feeding to prevent starvation. Others developed elaborate delusions, convincing themselves that the deaths they witnessed were theatrical performances designed to test their faith. A few attempted suicide, only to be saved by guards and subjected to punishments that made death seem merciful by comparison. The emperor's behaviour during this period suggested a complete break from reality. He began conducting conversations with the corpses of his victims, having their bodies preserved through techniques learned from Tibetan mystics, and arranging them around his throne during private audiences. Palace records indicate that he issued imperial edicts to these dead women, commanding them to respond to his questions, and growing violent when silence was their only reply. The breaking point for the palace staff came when the emperor ordered the construction of a special chamber designed to preserve his victims indefinitely. The Chamber of Eternal Service, as it became known, featured innovative preservation techniques that kept bodies in a state resembling life for months after death. The emperor would visit this chamber daily, conducting elaborate rituals that combined necrophilia with imperial ceremony. News of these atrocities began leaking beyond the palace walls, despite the death penalty for revealing palace secrets. Merchants who supplied the palace noticed the increasing orders for unusual materials, embalming fluids, restraining devices, and surgical instruments that had no legitimate medical purpose. Provincial governors received increased techniques consumed resources that should have funded military campaigns and public works. Tax revenues that once supported infrastructure improvements were diverted to purchasing exotic chemicals and importing foreign experts in anatomy and preservation. The spiritual consequences proved equally devastating. Palace Buddhist monks, required to perform funeral rites for the emperor's victims, began refusing to participate in ceremonies they considered blasphemous. Several committed suicide rather than continue enabling what they recognized as systematic sacrilege. The Confucian scholars who served as imperial advisors found themselves unable to reconcile the emperor's actions with any philosophical framework that acknowledged human dignity. The final collapse began when a group of palace women, driven beyond desperation, attempted a coordinated escape during the festival of the Dragon Boat. Their plan, developed through the secret correspondence network, involved setting fire to the Chamber of Eternal Service as a distraction, while they scaled the palace walls using silk ropes hidden in their quarters for months. The attempt failed catastrophically. Guard dogs tracked down the escapees before they reached the outer walls, and their recapture provided the emperor with an opportunity to demonstrate his creative approaches to punishment. The execution of the conspirators, conducted in the palace courtyard before the assembled population of concubines and servants, lasted 3 days and nights. The screams that echoed from the courtyard during this period were heard by residents of the surrounding city, marking the first time the palace's horrors penetrated beyond its walls into public consciousness. The emperor's reign ended not with revolution or conquest, but with a silence that descended upon the forbidden city like morning fog over a battlefield. On the morning of the winter solstice, servants found his chambers empty, save for the scent of jasmine incense and a single black silk slipper beside his bed. The imperial robes lay carefully arranged, as if their occupant had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the weight of his legacy, pressed into the silk like a stain that would never fade. The official proclamation spoke of the emperor's ascension to join his celestial ancestors, but the servants who had witnessed his final weeks with graves beyond the city walls. The preserved bodies, some still bearing traces of their final expressions, were interred at midnight by volunteers who swore oaths of silence. Yet even today, groundskeepers at the site report hearing whispers carried on the wind during autumn nights, voices speaking in dialects that disappeared from the region centuries ago. The surviving palace women faced an uncertain fate. Some were returned to their families, bearing children whose paternity remained forever unspoken. Others chose to remain within the palace walls, having known no other world for so long that freedom itself seemed more terrifying than captivity. A few simply vanished during the chaotic transition, their names disappearing from palace records as if they had never existed at all. The most disturbing discovery came years later, when renovations in the palace basement revealed a sealed chamber that did not appear on any architectural plans. Behind walls 3 feet thick, workers found shelves lined with ceramic jars, each containing what appeared to be preserved human organs floating in an amber-coloured liquid. The jars bore labels in the emperor's distinctive handwriting, marking dates, names, and detailed observations about the specimens within. The contents were burned immediately, but not before several workers noted that the most recent jar bore yesterday's date, though the emperor had been dead for 3 years. Modern scholars debate whether the emperor's disappearance represents divine judgment, psychological collapse, or something more sinister. The palace records contain no mention of illness, no indication of suicidal thoughts, no evidence of foul play. He simply ceased to exist, leaving behind questions that have haunted historians for generations. Some suggest that the systematic horror he created within the palace walls generated forces beyond human understanding. That cruelty, when practiced with sufficient dedication and creativity, eventually demands payment from its practitioner. The Women's Secret Correspondence Network, discovered in its entirety only decades after the emperor's disappearance, contained one final letter that was never delivered. Written pleasure. In the end, the most terrifying aspect of this story may not be the cruelty that was documented, but the cruelty that remains hidden, waiting in archives that have never been opened, in chambers that have never been found, in questions that have never been asked by those who fear the answers too much to seek them.